thank you. I'm really excited to share our success story and tell you a little bit about our project and how we're currently managing our whole agenda process. I do want to let you know that I am from the City Clerk's department. I am not from the IT department. So hopefully nobody will ask anything that's way too technical that I won't be able to answer. But we will get started. And I do have, for part of our presentation today, an actual live demo that I'll VPN in to my city's desktop, and I actually will put in some live agenda items for you guys so you can see how the whole process works. So I'm thinking my presentation is really general. I'm hoping there's a lot of users in here, practitioners. Hopefully not a lot of people are going to ask me a lot of questions that I can't answer, but really technical. But I'm just kind of excited to share how we kind of thought outside the box on using our Laserfiche. Our agenda today is I'm going to go through the timeline and overview of our workflow project from the beginning to the end. I'm going to tell you about our lessons learned, and I think that's really important. So if I highlight something that we did and we wouldn't do again, maybe you'll learn from my lessons so you won't do the same thing. And lastly, to give you a demo. So this is a typical feeling in the City Clerk department since we deal with our agendas, and this is the way we totally felt before we started doing the workflow process. That at the agenda packet day, we had stacks and stacks and stacks of paper all around us. We were the last department other than the print shop guy leaving City Hall. We do this all on a Thursday, so we were always last on a Thursday. All the submitting departments that had submitted their items way late, they all left at time and they walked by and say, bye, see ya, we're going out. But we got kind of tired of being involved in all that paper and having to stay behind, and we wanted a new way to process that paperwork. So our timeline, our project actually began at about April 2012. And at that point, we had a brand new assistant city manager appointed at the city. He had been there about a month and a half, and he said, I am sick and tired of all this paper and this whole process. I really want to task you guys to find a way that we can automate this. And the City Clerk's department said, yes, we would love to automate. We had seen that past January at Laserfiche conference, some information about workflow, and we're like, ooh, that might work. We saw a couple other vendors. We had actually gone to another session on agenda. So we kind of knew a little bit about automating, and then we knew there was other vendors out there. So we thought, okay, we'll start looking. And then in the mail, about a month after we were asked to work on the project, Laserfiche sent us this nice, wonderful letter to the city of Thousand Oaks telling us that they were no longer going to be supporting the United platform, which is what we were running. That if we wanted to really have all those bells and whistles that we had seen at the last Laserfiche conference, we needed to upgrade. And we needed to either look at Avante or Rio. But we weren't going to be able to continue forward with what we had. So we're like, okay, that might be kind of nice. I was able to show in that letter that Laserfiche said they were no longer going to be supporting all these upgrades. We're not going to be running on the United platform, so that was a plus for us to sell it to the IT department for the upgrade. And then the real carrot to the whole project for management was that Laserfiche was offering an incentive. And if we upgraded, they were actually going to give us a credit for all the money that we had spent for our software in the United platform. So then it made the upgrade very affordable. Management was, okay, we can look into this. We arranged for a demo. They saw how a basic little workflow would work, and they said, yes. So in July, they approved our project. They said, yes, you can upgrade from United to Avante and continue forward with looking at a workflow for your agenda process. As we started looking through to develop our timeline on the project, because the City Clerk's department, we are the administrators for the software, we get minimal support from our IT department. They assist us sometimes on the server end, but a lot of the day-to-day activities, the City Clerk's department does. When we have briefcases to import, we do it all. The IT department doesn't assist us that way. So we felt it was a little bit above our head on the upgrade. So as part of the project, we included a Laserfiche engineer to assist us with upgrading from the United platform to Advante, and we also included for Laserfiche to assist us with writing our workflow. So the workflow that I'm going to show you today, it originally started with a Laserfiche engineer assisting us in writing it, and then we've modified it, we've updated it on our own. And a lot of this project, I do want to point out my coworker on the project is Laura McGuire, the records management analyst, and she's here in the front row. So together we worked on this project. October 2012 is when we actually upgraded to Advante, so everything was all done by then, and we started our facts gathering requirements. So Laserfiche wanted to know, where do you want to place these documents, and how do you want them routed, that whole process. They started gathering that information, and we did it rather quickly because way back in April, when we were asked to start looking at it, we started gathering that information. We started looking at if we could do the ultimate system, how do we want it routed? Because we didn't like the way it was being routed paper, so how are we going to change it? November was a very busy month for Laura and I. We ended up having weekly project meetings with our Laserfiche engineer. They would develop components of the workflow. We would test it. We would all brainstorm. We would develop for, let's say we have emails that are sent, so we would develop all the wording for the emails. We would send that to them. They would test it. Then we would meet back again. We would test it. Everything was put on our server so that in between our meetings we could try things out, make sure it all worked. By December, we actually had a completed workflow. In December through the end of January, we tested the whole system. We put in various live data. We tried our best to see if we could break the system, do things that we thought maybe the users might do. You know, they're not going to submit it right. They're going to not follow our instructions. What could we do to try to make it so error messages would pop up? We had a lot of fun trying that, experimenting, and coming up with, oh, don't do this, don't do that, type of things. In February, our project was complete. We signed off with Laserfiche saying that the workflow did exactly what we wanted it to do. It was installed on our server, and we very quickly realized we wanted to make a copy of it. We made a copy of it, and then that's where we started making some of our different modifications in. So we never touched and ruined the original, but we can make adjustments on the copy. And then once we tested the copy and it was good, then we could then replace and make that modified version our new original to run. Now Laserfiche wrote the workflow for us with all of our input, but then we had to develop training materials. So we needed to be able to instruct our staff on how they were going to be submitting items and the whole process. And all the staff that we started training, they were used of using Laserfiche through WebLink. So they were used of only going in and doing search-only capabilities to now we were going to have them, they were going to be able to import documents. They were going to have to start checking documents out of a library repository. They were actually going to access it through web access. So we had to develop training materials so we could explain the whole process to them. We actually developed pamphlets and booklets that we could post on the internet, but then we had screenshots and various things during training. And we held our first training in April of 2013. We broke up the groups into, we have what we call the submitting departments. So those individuals that actually be submitting the information into workflow, and then we have our reviewers. So those are the individuals that are reviewing, approving, making recommendations on the agenda process. So we held separate trainings for those groups, and we had to have multiple trainings. After we conducted the training, we knew that we needed to run some live data through the system. So in May and June, we selected items from the agenda. It still went through the paper process, but we put some live data through. The first time we did it, we selected one item. We tried running it through so we could get input. That user came back with some great recommendations of oh, I never really received an email on this, it would have been nice. The reviewer said, oh, this was a little difficult for me to check out, maybe if we did something like this instead. Then we started the next agenda and we actually submitted 2 items and then 3 items. So we did multiple items, but never a full agenda during our test process. We then used that input, and some of it was very valid input, and we went back and we made some modifications to our templates that we used. We made modifications to the emails that were sent, and we made a modification to the workflow with gathering that information from the users to make the whole system more user-friendly for them so we would have a more successful outlook of the whole program. August, we updated some of our training materials, and then we held refresher courses because we told everybody when they actually went to their training back in April that as of the September 10th, 2013 City Council meeting, paper items were no longer going to be submitted, that they had to use the new system. So we offered some refresher training, and I do admit that the first couple agendas, it was a lot of hand-holding, that we actually went to the individuals and we sat there at their desk and we made them submit the items, but we coached them along the way. Yes, you're doing that right. No, don't do that. Yes, this is right, so that they could feel more comfortable with the system. This is one of the screenshots from our actual workflow. It's actually the starting of our workflow. And I know it's difficult to see, but we actually made the starting rule actually depends upon a field in our template. So if an individual submits an item and they forget to change one of the fields on the template, and I'll show you that in a few minutes, their item just stays there. And so that was a common question that people called. They're like, okay, I submitted it and it's not leaving my folder, it's just staying there. What did I do wrong? And we would have to remind them that they had to change that in order for it to flow. We also have, in our workflow, we had to write a script for our emails. We, at the City of Thousand Oaks, we use GroupWise for our email system, and our IT department was unable to get our Laserfiche server to communicate properly with our GroupWise server. So we had to make a few modifications. We actually have a script in there on who actually receives the emails. So it's not 100% dependent upon you as the user. Instead, because you put it in a folder that says it's Public Works Department, there's a list of 3 people in Public Works Department that submit items. The email is sent to those 3 people. Now, agenda submitters. I'm going to tell you first a little bit about the old system, so then you can see where we've gone with the new system. So the agenda submitters, those are the individuals in the department that typically it is a lot of our clerical staff that are actually submitting the items now into workflow. But they are the same individuals that when we did the paper-based system, they would submit the item through GroupWise to a group called Agenda Review. So they would email that document out. And the timeline is that was done 2 weeks before the City Council meeting. So they would email their document, so they would attach their staff report. 99% of the time, if their staff report referred to exhibits or attachments, they never sent them. Their staff report was never a finalized report because it's just going to a review group. Who cares if it's not the final? So they would send whatever they had done at that point out. It went to, the email went to the finance department, city attorney's office, city manager's office, and city clerk. City clerk, we received it only really for notification that we knew the items that were supposed to go on the agenda actually now had been routed for review. And the 3 departments that were first reviewing it were the finance department, city attorney's office, and city manager's office. Out of those 3, the submitting department would typically get back responses from 2 departments only. The city attorney's office never provided any input ever on the staff reports. So you would email it to them and you wouldn't hear anything back. Finance department, now that individual was a little more techie, so he would open up your Word document, he would actually redline it, but he never emailed you back your redline version. Instead, he would go in and he would copy the paragraphs that had changes and put that in the body of the email that he sent you. City manager's office. Now, at this point with the paper-based, it wasn't the current assistant city manager that we had, it was another one. And he didn't like to review documents on a computer, so they were printed. And he would hand mark all of his notes and notations on that to you. Now, we told everybody 2 weeks before is when you have to submit it, and then everything was due to the city clerk's department 1 week before. So in that week, those agenda review people were supposed to be reviewing. Well, that wasn't happening. So on Tuesdays, we would start calling the department saying, where are your items, where are your items? Sometimes they would say, I didn't get anything back yet, and they would have to track it down. Sometimes what would happen is they go, oh, I got some input from finance, and they would print out the report and bring it to us, only to find later that afternoon, finally through snail mail, they would get the input from the city manager's office. And they would have to come to our department, take back their report, update it, and bring us back a new paper copy. They also, because they may be getting input from 2 different departments, because we know the 3rd department really wasn't giving them any input, they would get conflicting information. So finance would say, oh, change it to this. City manager's office would say, change it to this. And now the user's like, well, what do I do? Which one do I listen to? Because it doesn't make any sense. I can't do both changes. So the submitters really wanted a way for, with the workflow, when we started asking them what they wanted to see, they really wanted it so that they could get back a single document with notations from all 3 departments. So we said, oh, with workflow, we can do that. That's not going to be a problem. Now on the paper-based system, once it finally came to the city clerk department, we would review it to make sure there wasn't anything that needed to be changed. If we did, they obviously had to make that change, bring us a new paper copy. On Thursdays is when we would print our packet. On Thursday morning, we would have a stack, and it could be pretty tall, of all the agenda items and all the attachments, and the city manager, assistant city manager, would come back down and go through all the pages to see if there's any last-minute changes, any contracts, resolutions that needed a signature. He would physically sign them at that point. Then when he left the city clerk's department, any page that had a signature, we'd have to make a new copy, replace it in our packet so that everything would be signed. Then we took that huge stack and we had to scan it because it has to go into our Laserfiche repository because we put the agenda and the packets available at 5 p.m. that day for the public. Then we'd have to carry over that stack to the print shop because he didn't want to take anything that we could export out of Laserfiche at that point, and he would have to scan it because the way his copier works, it would scan it. He could make modifications, he could adjust if he thought it was a little crooked or whatever, and then he would print the pages that he needed, all the copies. And we were, at that point, we were getting 35 packets printed. Most of the time, the packet was at least 1.5 reams of paper. The new way we're doing, the agenda submitters, we created folders for them, a brand new folder structure in our repository called Agenda. Then the department, each department, once you click on their folder, they have 3 folders: a for submission folder, a pending approvals, and requires revision folder. So they submit their item in their submission folder, and they submit everything in the native format. So if they have a Word document, they submit it as Word. If their attachments are Excel, they submit it. If their attachments actually are a PDF, then they can submit that. Once they tell on the template that they were ready for it to start, they changed the status bar on their template from pending to submitted. It immediately flies out of their submission folder and it goes down into the pending review folder, and shortcuts are sent to the 3 reviewing departments for them to start looking at, and emails are generated. Ultimately, at the end, when they're going to get back information, they're going to get back a single document with notations from all 3 departments. And that actually is a screenshot over here of our template, but you'll be able to see a little better when we do our demo. But when they submit, the user IDs, because it was a brand new system for everybody and they were used to using WebLink, we created a second user ID for them now as a name user. And initially, when they went into web access, the only folder that they could see was their agenda folder. They couldn't see anything else. We didn't want to cause extra confusion. So that was the only thing that they could see. Over time now, we've changed it so that as they are a named user, we've added all the other folders that they can normally see through WebLink, through web access. So now when they log in, they don't just see just their agenda folders, they can see any other items that they can see within the Laserfiche repository. But at first we made it so that they only saw those items, it wasn't confusing for them, and we really didn't get complaints from the users that they had to have 2 user IDs. One, if they were doing a submission for an agenda item, and then if they were searching when they needed a resolution or city council minutes, they went into WebLink and they used another user ID. So we were very fortunate that they didn't complain that way for us. We asked them to put in a title, and we actually extract from the template, the title is put into emails that are sent. So it's a little meaningful to the reviewers and also the submitters. When they get back an email and they can see the title and they know it's the staff report or they know it's an attachment, they know exactly what type of item they need to update. They actually can put what section of the agenda it's on, so we know if it's a department report, if it's a consent calendar item, kind of where it's going to lay out on the agenda. The submitted column, that is the starting of our workflow. So if they do leave that at pending, then it doesn't fly and they have to go back in and change it to submitted. They have notes that they can add. Sometimes they may want to say if they had submitted a PDF of a contract, they may want to put in that this was previously reviewed by and put the city attorney's name on it that had reviewed that contract. So then there's no questions and then it can be re-reviewed again by that same attorney. And meeting date. It's a drop down. We, the city clerk's department, we close the meeting. So if everything is due, and we backed it up by 1 day now, on Mondays at 10 a.m., we go to an executive team meeting on Tuesdays. After that meeting on Tuesdays, if we're not aware of any last minute items that have to be added to the agenda, we close the meeting date. Therefore, people that are submitting late, they can't choose that date. They can't go behind us. If it truly needs to go, they have to call us and beg for mercy to say, please, please open the meeting again. So it gives us a little bit more control over it, and it has tremendously assisted with the department submitting items on time. And they would click OK, and their item would go for review. Now the agenda reviewers, again, it starts out first with our city attorney, finance, and city manager's office. And what the 3 departments agreed during training was they would like finance and city attorney's office to review those first, items going on Monday. By Wednesday, before they leave, those 2 departments are supposed to review their items. On Thursdays is when the assistant city manager likes to do his review. So he likes to review only if there's other 2 comments. So like this week, when we actually log in, you're going to see real live, I'm going to import some data, but you're going to see there's real live data because it's an agenda review process right now. And I nicely reminded the assistant city manager last night that this is an agenda review. Our city hall is closed every other Friday, so we're closed this Friday. Monday's a holiday. next Thursday is a packet day. This is short. Can you review possibly on Thursday for me? And he reminded me nicely that I will only review it if finance and city attorney's office has reviewed. So it's helping us to get those other departments to review because they don't want to make the assistant city manager upset, and it's kind of helping. The reviewers, they log in, they see the shortcuts, and they actually check out the document out of the repository. So if it's a Word document, they check it out, and it's opening up Word for them. They can use track changes, redline, they could add in any type of notations that they want to for that document. We actually have, the next screen, we actually have the plugin. We actually use the plugin feature, and we'll show that in a few minutes, but basically they can then check the document back into the repository. We do have it so that when one individual does have the document checked out, another individual cannot. So therefore, we're not getting where one can't check it back in. But so far, we really haven't had any instances that that's an issue. And because the city manager's office didn't want to review it until those two departments were finished, and we couldn't guarantee that if we sent it to finance first, that finance would get everything done in 24 hours in order to send it to city attorney to get done in 24 hours. Instead, we made the shortcuts go to all three departments at the same time. All of our reviewers are using web access when they review the documents, and we've reminded them that that means that they can do it also remotely. We always have a situation in May for, there's a city attorney's conference, and our whole city attorney department is gone. So if items haven't been reviewed, or if it happens to be an agenda review week, then they have to review it while they're away. So the web access has allowed us to do that. Now we do use the Word integration or the Word plugin. So on all of our Word documents, we do have on the ribbon, there is the Laserfiche. And this is showing that once we click on metadata, it actually opens up our template. In there, those reviewers need to change the status. And they have three ways that they can do that. They can choose that the item is 100% approved, so therefore they had no red line, no changes, nothing. It's good to go. They can change that there is some technical changes so that it has minor modifications, or they can choose that it needs to be rerouted back to them. And that is actually a common one that some of the departments will do. If there's a lot of mistakes or various things they want changed, they want it to come back to them again so they can make sure that those changes were made. And in the paper-based system, the reviewers never, ever requested to have the documents come back to them. So then sometimes when they actually saw the printed packet, they would read something and they would say, this is wrong. That's not what I told them to do. And so we always had a huge supplemental where the departments would have to go through and say, well, this was printed in error, these are the changes. So this has helped cut down too on our supplementals that we have to produce after the agenda's been posted. And then they just clicked to check it back in the repository. We do have version controls, versions turned on so that we can see all the versions. And occasionally, Laura, I will get the recall from one of the reviewing departments and they'll say, this just came back up to me and I don't think they made all the changes that I asked. Can you please send me my last red line? And we can email them, we can export it and email them the red line that they did last time so that they can verify and check to see were all those changes made. Throughout our workflow, we do have a few decision trees where it's looking at our template and trying to determine has it been approved and who's it been approved by so that it can remove shortcuts from various folders. It will leave it in if it hasn't been approved. But ultimately, it will look at and see if all three of those departments have provided a status. So either maybe two have approved it, one's asked for revisions, or all of them have approved it, or all have asked for revisions. It will then ultimately make a decision and send it back if it needs changes back to the department's pending review updates for folder. So the department knows that they need to update, they get an email, and we do have rights on all of those folders. So we allow the submitters on the for submission folder, obviously we give them the right and authority that they can import. While it's pending review, they cannot check out the document, they cannot open it. All they can see is the status by looking across on the metadata. Once it requires revision, then they have the ability, again, to check it back out, make modifications, and send it back in. And some of that was because we didn't want them, if they could see that finance had made some modifications and some red line in their document, we didn't want them to be able to update it until all 3 departments provided input. Because it was going back to the old way before then with just getting input from one department and not everybody seeing it. And this has really helped the reviewing department so that they don't provide conflicting information, because that was happening a lot. That one department would say, change it to this, the other department would say, change it back to this. So now that all 3 can see each other's input, it's helping to avoid some of that conflicting information and less updates on the actual submitting department. So if the document does require updating, then the agenda submitter would go in. They're going to check back out the document. They can see the track changes. And depending on the departments, some of these individuals then save that document to a local drive, and they notify the project manager, who then goes in to see if he just needs to accept all the changes. Sometimes there's a note in there that says, you need to add more background, new history, whatever they're asking for in that document. And then that documentation would then be updated and ultimately put back into the repository. So sometimes it's not the same individual that had submitted the document. Sometimes they don't have the authority to go in to make all those changes. So they may have to route it within their own department in order to make those changes. Again, it only will go to their, get an email to them for updating if it was either conditionally approved or asked for it to be resubmitted. If it had all been approved by those 3 departments, it still stays in their pending approval folder, and an email is sent to the city clerk. And at that point, a shortcut is generated for the city clerk department. So we are part of the reviewing group, but we only review after those 3 departments and any modifications have been made to that document. So then we would review it, and it would go through the same type of process, that we can approve it, or we could ask for changes. And typically, when the city clerk department is reviewing it, we're looking at it more along the consistency of making sure some of the headers or information is correct. Are they actually listing all their attachments? Because sometimes within the text of the document, they may not set attachment 1, but then at the end of the document, they reference attachment 1. So we're looking at it from a different perspective than the first 3 individuals that had been reviewing it. If ultimately at the end, when the city clerk's department approves the document, an email is sent back to the agenda submitter letting them know that their document has been finally approved, and it leaves their folder, so they can't see it at all anymore. The city clerk department, we actually have 3 folders. We have a review folder, so that's when the item is first submitted to us. That's where our shortcut goes, and it stays in there while we're reviewing it. Once we approve it, it leaves the workflow, it moves up to the processing folder, and at that point is when the workflow is terminated. Once it's in our processing folder, then our records management staff converts those documents. They're in their native format, and everything in our repository is stored in TIFFs. So we can use, we've done it a combination of ways of using Laserfiche Snapshot and converting those to TIFFs. And we've also experimented with actually exporting the document. So we drag it out, we put it on our desktop, we make it into a PDF, we compile the PDF, and then re-import into Laserfiche. And sometimes it depends on how large the document is, depends on which process we use. But ultimately at the end, as you can see here, this one particular item, it had 6 things that were submitted through agenda review. we compile them all together to make it a single item. And on our repository, we keep each individual item for the agenda as its own separate. So 6A and 7A, we would actually, once we have an agenda would be in that folder, so that the public, they can click on the agenda, but then if there's only 1 or 2 reports they want to see, they can open up that. Instead of having to open up a 500-page document, we've broken it up for them into segments. Now, City Clerk's department, once we convert these to TIFFs, we now actually have worked with the print shop, and they were much more open because we said, we are not going to take this now that we've started off with a digital and get down at the very end. We're not printing these out for you and giving them to you so that you can scan them to print as copies anymore. That's not going to happen. So now we actually export and put them on a shared drive for the print shop. And we walk over our little print request to him. We say, Mike, it's ready for you. And he imports it into his system. He does the magic that he needs to do in order to print. Along the way of this project too, we try to encourage more of the staff and department heads. Do you really need that printed copy? Or can we start giving you a link? They weren't super receptive at first, but we have actually, working with our IT department, we actually now put it on an FTP site. We have, when we first implemented this, out of the 5 city council members, 3 went 100% digital. So we eliminated printing their copies, and they started reviewing it on their iPads. We currently have a vacancy, so now we have 2 of our 4 that are doing 100% digital, and they no longer receive printed copies. Almost all of our department heads got rid of their printed copies. We have a few that we have to have, obviously, for public review, but we have gone down from 35 printed copies to 10 printed copies. Some of the efficiencies that we determined along the way, the first thing for our submitters, they were no longer having to reconcile comments from 3 separate or 2 separate documents. They now were getting 1 single document. They were no longer getting conflicting, and they said it's so much more efficient for them, the project managers, everybody, to see that input and make any modifications to their staff report. They can actually monitor electronically now. They can log into Laserfiche and they can see who's reviewed it, because they can see the status that finance has reviewed it, and they can see if finance said there's going to be changes or they need to see it again. So they kind of know what's going on. When they had emailed it out through GroupWise, they could see it had been delivered, but they didn't know when, if they were ever going to get any input. The reviewers, at first they told us they wanted all attachments as PDFs. Shortly after that, they said, we don't want PDFs anymore. We want everything we can get in this native format. So contracts, resolutions, ordinances, everything that they originally had wanted as a PDF, now everything is Word documents. So they can go through and they can redline anything that they want to. They find it so much easier to check it out, use track changes. If it's a PDF, the only thing they can do is in the template, they can add in some information in their notes column. So they really like that. And they like having the ability to see what the other comments are from reviewers, because they weren't seeing that information before. So they like knowing what the other departments are saying. And they're saying that they really do like to be able to access it remotely. We have eliminated 2 scanning sessions, because we're no longer, the records management staff's no longer scanning it to put it in to Laserfiche, and the print shop's no longer scanning. So tremendous savings in staff time alone on having to eliminate those scanning stations, because of course, City Clerk's department, when we scanned it in, we would scan it in, and then we did quality control, because we can't put it up and have something missing, something skewed, what if it was crooked, and no, we can't do that. So one person would scan it in and someone else would do quality control. So assist to that. Lessons learned. Test, 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 test. The more testing that you can do, the better off you are. We tested with creating, I told you we created all these new user IDs for everybody. So we physically logged in as every single person. We set it up so that when they import under their user ID, they automatically get the template for the agenda process. And we would occasionally find that we had did something wrong with someone's access and rights. And if we hadn't tested along the way, we wouldn't know that, oh my gosh, we forgot in this department, and we allowed them the ability to check out if it was in the pending approval folder. That's not what we want. So test, 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 test. Try everything that you can, including we were doing a lot of testing with emails. What do we want it to say? What information do we want to pull out of the template? And during this testing process, nobody else was receiving anything other than Laura and I. So we could test all day long. Didn't matter what we did. Our login IDs, I highly recommend trying the different IDs if you can to start off with, to limit, especially if you know your users. Are they going to be able to understand the whole system? If they can see your whole repository, you're better off just showing them a little tiny picture to begin with. We did try to get all of our stakeholders' input, and with doing the live data, running it through during those 2 months, we really did take to heart their input, and I think they really appreciated that and helped us as we continued forward in the project. We learned very easily and quickly that we needed to, when it talked about our workflow, that we should copy it, because at first, the first time we actually did modify the original one, we're like, oh my gosh, that's not working, what are we gonna do? So we quickly learned the ability to copy that workflow so we'd have a duplicate copy in order to make the modifications. There was a couple times, we weren't quite familiar with the starting rules and workflow. We're like, how come this isn't working? Oh, we had to learn how to turn on and turn off starting workflows because sometimes we had the wrong one running. We're submitting under our test one, but the real one, so nothing's working. And then we had no idea that when we were making some of these modifications and various things that we were really, on some of the cases, we're supposed to be turning off our workflow service and our server services. So we're calling our Laserfiche engineer going, how come this isn't working? Did you do this? Oh, no. So we've learned to monitor the support site. If something happens and we're kind of wondering like, gee, is this just us? Or is it something that other people are experiencing within Laserfiche or workflow? So we monitor the support site frequently. And we have become very good friends with a lot of our Laserfiche engineers that have assisted us on the project over the time period. So now, if I could get it. It's locked. Escape. Okay. Okay. I think so. It looks like it might have, because of the not doing anything, it kicked me out for a minute. So I thought it would be good for a demo. I'm actually VPNing into my desktop at work. And from my desktop at work, we are going to open up. I tend to run everything off of client. Obviously, the submitters and the reviewers, they're using web access. But records management, we run everything off client. So this is our whole repository. I am the administrator for the system, so you're going to see everything. Oh, you know what? Kate, is it okay? How do we get it so it's not showing? Okay. So this is our Laserfiche repository. And we cleverly named the agenda items. Agenda review is for those 3 reviewing departments and obviously City Clerk. Everything else down here, these departments, this is where the departments actually would be submitting their folders. So they have the for submission, the pending approval, and requires revision. And if I just go up here into City Attorney, this is what City Attorney currently has to still review for our agenda next week. City Manager, he should have all the items because he's obviously waiting for the 2 departments to finish. And Finance is still reviewing. But we can easily click on and see who has the items, and we can actually open up and look at templates and see what was going on. But we're going to start with for submission. So I'm actually going to submit items that I've saved on my desktop for you. Okay, so it pops up with our template, and we have our templates called Agenda Report. We asked for them to put in a title. This is supposed to be a meaningful title, and we asked that it matches. We actually maintain what we call the pending list, so it's the items that are pending, the items that where we're forecasting will be on the agenda. So it should match that, because there's times that what we save our document under the name here, that may be something that we want to call it quickly within Word, but that's not going to physically describe the project. So title would actually be describing our project. Oops, if I could type right. Katie. Just go back down to here. Yeah, okay. The agenda section is a pull down. So they can pick what section of the agenda their item would apply. This field is the key field. So submitted, if we change that to submitted from pending, that starts our workflow for us. And I will actually change that. I could add in any notes that I wanted to. It's not mandatory. And the meeting date, we select our meeting. Now this little feature down here, that apply these properties to all entries in this batch. Now I selected a whole item, which actually was 4 separate folders. So I can check to apply this to the batch. And that means everything in my template will apply to that data. My name at the very top, because they're individualized documents, they all have an individualized name. So we're encouraging everybody in the top portion of the name, that's where they can say it's attachment 1, it's attachment 3, it's attachment 5, so that we know what document it is. We thought this would be a good way so that everybody doesn't have to enter the same data multiple times, but there are some individuals that forget to check that box and then they have to enter the data more than once. Okay, so we click OK. It's going to tell us it's processing, importing our data. And it will go into our for submission folder. If by chance I hadn't changed my data from pending to submitted, it would stay there and I'd have to go and open my metadata in order for it to fly out. So it's going up in there, and then as soon as the workflow starts, you see them, they're leaving my folder. So they all left. Of course, we got calls right away from people. My documents left, they flew away, I don't know where they went. Just click on pending approval, there they are. So this actually has my demo data and then our real live data that our department submitted for this agenda. And copies have been placed. You can see here up in City Attorney's office, you can see all the folders in the middle and they say LF demo. So that's their shortcut. City Manager has theirs in Finance. Now when I'm going to go to City Manager. We can go and we could check out our document. I think that will work. Going to my desktop. Here's our actual staff report. We could go through, do modifications, redlining, and everything. Once you see here with the integration, you can see the Laserfiche top. We allow all the reviewers to open up the metadata, and they're only allowed to get to their own section. So city attorney can only change the status in city attorney's office and write notes. And the rest of them are grayed out for them. As the administrator, I can obviously go in and see everybody's and change everybody's. So I could go in here and I could say, city attorney approved it. I could say city manager conditionally approved. My screen's all squished over here. Yeah, I have to resize it so that I can see. Okay. So I updated, and when I check it back in, I could add comments if I wanted to in my version control. Close it. We suggested you could actually, you're prompted every time whether or not you want to keep this temporary copy or you want to delete it. And depending on what department it is and what their status, what they're doing, some of the departments choose to delete that local copy. So the reviewers, they don't want to see that document again. If they want to see that red line, they look it through versions control. The submitting department, so sometimes like to keep that other copy. So they can then put it into their common drives or wherever they want. And obviously I didn't click something right. You can see too, we open it this way, when we first submitted the document, we only had for our fields the name of the document, the agenda section, submitted department notes, and meeting date. Once we submitted it, you can see my template data changed. I have new fields in it now that allow for the departments to choose their status. And we did contemplate and we did play around with it that at first, all that data was there and it was causing confusion with our submitters. So instead, it was adjusted in our workflow to start with the one template. Once it was submitted, the template was changed. When I was opening it up in Word, because of the size, it wasn't letting me go down to actually click on OK to update the metadata. So now, because I asked for it to be revised, it should go back into my required revision. Approval?
Yeah, did you hit City Clerk instead?
Good thing Laura's looking out for me. Oh, the city attorney was so pending. Okay, so now all three are conditionally approved. Oh, city clerk, pending. And you see that my pending approval, the one item has left, and now it's in where my requires revision. So if I was the submitting department, at that point, I'd be getting an email telling me that I have an item in there for revision. I would check it back out. I could see all the red line, make the updates, check it back in. And if the department's asked for it to be resubmitted, it's obviously the shortcut's gonna go back up to them. They can make their changes. Again, once the finance, city attorney, city manager's office has approved it, then it's gonna come to city clerk. We would review it. Once we approve it, then it goes to us for processing. So that is our workflow in a nutshell. And it has been very efficient for us. It's really helped us to control the timelines for our agenda. It has streamlined the process for us tremendously. A lot of savings on us for our staff time. And I'd like to report that we do not have to stay late anymore on Thursdays, the packet day. We get to get home with everybody else. Yes. Mm-hmm.
The required revisions, these are all technically submitters lumped into there? So are all the?
No, actually, each department has its own. So if I close here, the agenda reviewers, then here, this is every city department going down here to Public Works.
Okay, so they all have their.
So they all have their own. And I want you to know, too, our police department, we actually contract out for our police department. So they're not in our building at all. And it's the sheriff's station, and they don't have any issues with submitting everything and doing everything through web access 100% remotely. It's working.
Do you use the signatures for approving anything, or no signatures?
No signatures. That was one of the changes too. When we did paper copies, the department heads signed off on everything. If two people had submitted, and we went to no signatures. So now everything in the packet doesn't have any signatures. The contracts don't have any signatures and anything. We've taken the approach that this is what we're proposing to City Council, and once it's approved, then those originals are signed. And then now those documents reside twice in our repository. Once it's our agenda packet, let's say if it has a contract, and once the contract's approved, it's also in our repository as an approved contract, and it has all the signatures on it then.
You create actual agenda, like a sheet with items that are going to be on the agenda? Was this created, or you have to manually?
We are manually creating it, but we do know that if we modify our workflow and various things that we can take, because the individuals are putting that information on here for us, that we could take and extract that information. We just haven't got to that point yet.
How does it know what order to put the items in the packet?
Oh, we actually, because we're doing the agenda manually, as far as typing them on and saying this is the order for the consent calendar. When records management processes it, we actually would name it according to the agenda item. So if it's, let's say our consent calendar is 7s, so if we know it's 7J, once we finally process it at TIFF, we save it as 7J. Is that?
Yeah, and then how does it number? So you have to do the 7Js, or does it number it that way?
We do it. We do it.
What's your criteria for those last minute beggars that are going? I mean,
It does happen every once in a while, and depending on how far out before packet day, depends on whether or not we actually go in and we reopen the meeting. And there have been occasions where we actually have the individual send us the item, because obviously we can, as administrators, we could submit it, so we can go into their folder and we can put it in, and then we're not having to reopen it so that someone else doesn't try to squeak something in. And then we make it still go through the agenda process. So far we haven't gone through and said, oh, just because it's Wednesday doesn't mean that everybody doesn't review it. And if it doesn't get reviewed, then it can't go.
You mentioned that you had 2 councilmen using electronic version. Do they actually use it during the meeting, or do they have to use the paper copy during the meeting?
You have one that only uses his iPad. The other one, sometimes she'll ask us if we have a paper copy that she can use. And so we use one of our public access copies we give to her. And I think it just sometimes depends on the item and how lengthy that report is. But to kind of tie into that, we are looking at, we use Granicus to film they videotape the meetings, and so we are looking at through you really using iLegislate and their voting mechanism. So then we would be taking these items we process in Laserfiche, and we actually then would put them in through Granicus, and they have to review it through their iPad, and they have to, because they're voting on an iPad, that's where all their notes would be for reviewing the document.
So is the packet easy for them to navigate, and is it easy for them to add notes? Like if they were gonna ask questions, they knew what it's gonna.
The few that are using 100% the iPads, they download the document off of our FTP site. They use Goodreader, and they put in any type of notes, notations, and when they come in, most of them have a meeting on Mondays with the city manager. They bring in their iPad, and they go through their notes that way.
What does it cost to print one copy of the whole thing?
One copy of,
That, for those who have to have it on paper?
well, the public, our fee, from the public, if you came in, we charge 15 cents a page.
What does it cost you with your printer to generate paper copies for those who work from hand to them?
You know, I'd have to look and see how much, because we actually do get a monthly invoice from our reprographics department. So I'd have to look and compare and see. It can tell you then how much they charge us, so you can see how much is savings, but we actually are charged for the printed copies from our reprographics department. But I don't know that number off the top of my head. Yes.
How do you handle page numbers for the agenda items? Do you have page numbers that correspond with item numbers?
So the individual staff reports, when they're submitted, obviously the individual is putting in their Word document, page 1 of 4, blah, blah, blah. When I put them on the FTP site, I actually add a header. So I add in a new header and I say agenda packet, and we put in, if it's 560 pages, page 4 of 560. That corresponds to those same 2 council members that are getting the printed copy. So those page numbers match. So if a council member says on page 5, then the person can open up their iPad and they're looking at the same exact page.
What do you use to do that? Adobe?
Adobe. I take the individualized PDFs, I merge them together, and then we add in a header. That's okay.
When you switched over to this system, how many users did you have to add as authenticated users to be able to submit via web access?
We started off tiny, and I still think we are kind of tiny as for name users. We started off with 36 name users for the first year. The next year we added 10 more, and we just added another 10. So we only have 56 name users. Now, and that's because a majority of our city staff, they are all going through WebLink, and they just have search-only capabilities.
So I'm not familiar with the organization. Your organization is fairly small.
Because it's for the entire city, so the entire city, we have over 500 employees. And out of that, we have, we haven't even used all the name for the 56 name users. And it's because right now we're really limiting to those individuals that are really using and submitting through the agenda review process. We do know as our numbers start to creep up, that's when we're going to actually have to look at switching from Avante to Rio, because I think then it's going to be more of a benefit to us, the additional bells and whistles.
So what kind of cost was that? I mean, just out of curiosity.
When we upgraded initially, we ended up getting a $40,000 credit, and so we ended up paying $35,000 to upgrade from United to Advante.
And that included the initial 30 hour?
Yes. We're here first, and then we'll go back.
So when you finish with the meeting and you have to post a resolution, meaning the votes, the actual votes, the document is in Word and you type it in, because you were saying you converted to PDF. So,
Right.
But your document's still in Word.
Correct.
You will update it and then send it to your folder that has resolutions for people to look at them for the rest of their.
Correct. Yeah. For minutes, that's what we would do, because we would put in the votes and everything. For a resolution, we have the original that now has signatures on it. We add in the certification page, and we actually do scan them to put them in to the repository. And the originals we do keep in our vault, and we put them in leather-bound minute books and resolution books.
And we are all out of time for today's session. I know some people have to run to their next class, but please feel free to stick around. Antoinette will be here to answer questions, and thank you all so much for attending.
Thank
Please
you
join
guys
me in
so much
giving
for
Antoinette a
coming.
hand.